G'day guys, welcome back to Sunset City. We've got a super exciting episode today because we are finally going to build the city and start planning things out. Man, I've been waiting for this moment for ages, so I'm super keen to get into things. Just quickly, though, I almost broke into song twice. I almost started singing Paradise City, and we built this city as well. I don't know. I think I gotta be careful of breaking into song in my intros. As you can see, we are no longer in map editor. We have a pretty healthy amount of money, $715, which is a lot more than I'm pretty sure I meant to start with. I don't know why it's $715. Maybe I'm used to playing in hard mode, but I'll take it because we're actually going to blow through so much money. Because the way we're going to be building the city is going to be quite different to what I usually do. So in the past, I have built my cities in chunks. So it's like you build the downtown and then you build a suburb over here and then something over there. And eventually, over like 6 months, you finally get a city. Whereas in this series, we are going to build the city. We're going to build a big chunk of it. We're going to zone it out. We're going to build all the roads, get lots of the big infrastructure in, and then we're going to be detailing it up throughout the series. Now, before we get to the planning and the zoning, there's a couple of setup things that I want to do. Our series is set in the 80s, which means that all the vehicles, all the buildings, all the architecture, and the way we build the city is going to be based around the 80s. And I've already seen a bunch of vehicles that are not 80s, not 80s vehicles, driving around our city. They're mostly vanilla, and I'm going to go through and just remove them using the advanced vehicle options mod. And I think that pretty much does it. So hopefully that removes all the vanilla ones. I don't see them driving around. And then if they are driving around, I have also grabbed some fantastic looking highways. I mean, rather than using these vanilla ones, I'm going to be using these concrete ones by Fear and by Kono. They look amazing. Let's have a little look at these. Yeah, these look amazing. Not only are they just, of course, American highways, but they are also super similar to the ones that they have in Florida. So I think they're going to work really well. Not to mention the pillars that they are using and also the space underneath. I mean, you can see the difference. I mean, how much of a gap we've got here, and then the vanilla ones are just these massive bulky sections. So that's actually going to give us a lot more room for our interchange here. And it means that we can actually lower parts of it down, and we've got much better clearance. So we can move some of these nodes, and I think that's going to look a lot better. The interchange definitely looks a lot better with this network, but unfortunately we don't have any highway lights on this network. I don't know why it doesn't come with it, but yeah, and I can't even change it with network skins. And the elevated texture is awesome, but the ground one is a lot brighter than the elevated version. So I don't know, hopefully that gets updated at some point. But for now, it looks pretty nice, and I'm gonna just put the game on pause because just updating all those roads has definitely put a dent in our budget, and we're now losing some cash. So let's keep the game on pause for a little while. Let's drag out some roads and start thinking about where things are going to start going. Because we've got a budget, I'm going to be using some of these planning roads which have zero cost and zero maintenance, so they're going to be great for planning out some of the roads that we're going to be using. But I'm probably going to use them more for our streets because I already have a pretty good idea where some of the main roads are going to sit. In fact, we're looking at two of them. This road here, so it is, well, I'm going to make it a highway and also a main road that's stretching through our city. And the parts that I'm going to keep as a highway, of course, are the roads that go across the bay. And then I reckon as it gets into some of the swampland, yeah, then it can go back into a highway. But as it stretches through the city, I'm just going to make it a main road that's going to have minimal intersections. So I might, you know what, I'm going to, I guess if I'm going to yeah, okay, let's just get rid of them. So hopefully I'm not going to regret demolishing all that. But we'll just see, we'll see what we can do with these larger roads, and then we'll drag out the rest of it. Alright, so because we've got this new road here, I don't think that this is going to work quite as well as it was working when we had just the highway instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demolish these guys. Actually, I'm going to demolish that, and that is fine. No, we'll do that as well. Because what we need to do is we actually need to give this all the same node, otherwise it starts getting a little bit weird. This is something that I learned when I built the same type of intersection in Oceania for the port. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some of these big roads, and I'm going to drag it out like that. We'll put this guy between the two highways over here, and I'm actually going to connect these guys up, but we'll just move that a little bit further and do a bit of this. Trust me, all this is going to make sense in a sec. There we go. And what we're doing here is we're just making it so that they're sharing the same road, and we can make those dedicated turning lanes much easier using the one node. Basically, I'm trying to limit the amount of usage this intersection is going to get. So I reckon we'll probably ban traffic in some areas. We're going to make it so that these guys can access this ramp without having to go through this intersection. And we might not even need this guy down here. Two sets of lights, very close together, massively busy area. Don't worry, I've got an idea. So basically, not all traffic's going to be affected by these lights, and they're probably not going to be seeing that much usage anyway, because I'm going to have it so that all vehicles in that right lane will always just be able to turn right, regardless of the lights. We've got no vehicles turning left into this area because they can just use this right-hand lane, and for these lights, basically the only vehicles that are going to be using this, using the lights in the first place, are vehicles turning left into this area, and you know what, that's it. They're the only vehicles that are going to be using the lights. We're pulling out the big guns and thinking about where these big roads go. By no one's surprise, I have completely forgotten about my planning roads and just started dragging out some of the most expensive roads we have. We are well and truly eating through our budget, and I reckon we might even just blow through our budget in this episode, so let's just keep an eye on that. But we've done a bit of line work down here, and like I said, this is barely an intersection with traffic lights. I mean, if we were to think about it, the only time they're going to be using these lights is when vehicles are going to be turning left. So of course that's going to be happening a bit, but you know, we're not going to have any other traffic crossing over those lines. So I'll probably do something similar to this, but yeah, we need to start planning out these roads. So what I've been doing with these roads is just thinking about where they go in terms of like, what's the purpose of these roads in the first place? Being these main roads, I feel like I need to justify the reason why they're going in that direction, and they need to go for a fair distance. They can't really just go for a little while and then stop. So as you can see, these roads are heading towards fairly important areas. We've got the Keys down here, we've got the swampland towards other cities, and then we've also got you know, this heading towards the beach. So this is a very important area too, and we've also got our port. So also our downtown. So a lot of these roads have to sort of head towards there. So let's pull out our planning road, and I've already started dragging out this guy. So I'm going to continue that. You might notice that my grid layout is so different to Miami. Miami is probably one of the most rigid, gridded cities that I've ever seen, and I am not going to do that just because it's not that interesting when you build cities like that at Cities Skylines. I think it's way more interesting when you have roads do something that's a little bit more like this, a little bit more different to what they are typically like in a lot of the cities that I take inspiration from, and also scale. The cities that we typically build in Cities Skylines are scaled down versions of cities, and if you just do a grid, then it actually makes the city look a lot smaller than it really is. Whereas when you use roads like this, it tends to make the city feel a lot larger. Something that's proven to be a real challenge are these rivers that cut through the city. I mean, obviously we don't want to have too many roads that travel across these rivers because bridges are expensive and we need to give boat access to a lot of these areas. I mean, all through here we're going to have some of the larger boats, but going down this path or going down this river, we're going to need to give access to some boats that are going through. So it's probably going to be the main roads that are going to be using those bridges. We've got one here that I'm pretty certain is going to stay there, but whatever this road does, I mean, I kind of feel like it needs to connect up here, but no, that's ridiculous. Why would it connect there? I mean, if we did something like this, then we would have much better direct access to our port and our harbor, so maybe it does that. And it probably, I mean, these are large roads at this stage, but I reckon that some of these will probably end up being much smaller roads, but they're just main roads. Basically, that's what we're just going to keep in mind. But these rivers, I mean, we don't want to have too many bridges. One there, one there. We've got one up here, and that could be it. Of course, we've got these highways, but maybe that's all we really need. Now that I've figured out where my bridges are going to sit, I'm going to also drag out the roads crossing the river and then demolish the parts where the river is going to sit, because you typically find that these roads still look as if they were connected. I mean, they're obviously not, but they have this continuation of where the grid would sit, even though we don't have the most classic gridded city layout in Sunset City. I'm still going to make it look as if the roads were connected, or at least continued along, but were disconnected because of the river. And that goes for the highway as well. So obviously our highway is already established, but these roads would have been there before the highways. So when we drag out these roads, let's say if we had one like that, then I'm going to disconnect it in places like that. And that way we'll have nothing underneath the underpass unless it is a main road, and our streets will just look as if they've been disconnected because of the highway. Probably one of the most important parts of designing the city for me is trying to include as many different aspects from the city I'm taking inspiration from into the city. This is something that I always overthink, but I totally regret if I don't place something in the right area. So I've already spoken about scale, I've spoken about the influences of the natural environment, and thinking about the main roads where they're going to go to the busiest areas. But probably the most overarching influence is trying to include those special aspects that I look at the city and go, I want to include that. And look, maybe special isn't the right word, but I definitely look at these areas and I think I'm definitely going to do something like that in Sunset City. This diagonal road that stretches to the downtown in Miami is absolutely not special, but it breaks up the grid. You've got those iconic Miami palm trees, and then one of the many waterways that stretches throughout the city. You've got one of them too, so definitely got to include this area. These waterways also influence some awesome looking split bridges, so the most interesting looking one has to go heart and center. The way that the elevated highway divides up the city streets and then influences the way that the city develops. And it's really just those little differences that either make you think, I wonder why the road does that, or man, that looks super interesting, I'm going to include that. Or maybe it's those aspects that are just so iconic that you absolutely need to include. That's what this whole part of the process is all about, and it is super important to me because it's those areas that I look forward to the most and the parts of the city that I really can't wait to get to. And I guess for me, it just continues to justify the reason why my cities are never massively symmetrical. You know, I never seem to have any grid that looks the same, or I never really have any like 90-degree angle corners. You know, it's always very much influenced by the environment or history or politics or maybe even funding. And then I think probably when it comes to the hierarchy, I'm probably thinking about the way that it's going to affect my city in terms of traffic flow. That's kind of bottom of the barrel. I think it might be one of the last things I'm thinking about. And to be honest, I kind of like it because it means that I have to solve the traffic problems as they arise, as my roads and my highways and my infrastructure fail me. which is kind of what happens in reality. It's exactly what governments have to do. They have to figure out, why is it failing? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to put in place? We're gonna have to do all that in Sunset City because we are planning out all these roads. We've got a whole bunch of main roads and everything is all connected up. We haven't really considered anything to do with traffic. We're just gonna have to wait and see. And I honestly don't really mind working that way. But on top of thinking about the different aspects that I want to include within Sunset City, I am just really dragging out roads in directions that I think make the most amount of sense. We are going to be building city very, very quickly, way faster than any other city that I've ever built. So planning out these roads straight up using these planning roads is so useful. Not paying any money for these and not paying any taxes is, well, it's definitely going to save us because I am absolutely no good at making money in this game. So it's going to be a real challenge trying to get this thing to work, especially going headfirst into a city rather than, developing up things slowly. I don't know. It's either going to work or it's going to break us completely. We're just going to have to wait and see. But because we are diving into this headfirst, I have to really think about where these roads are going because it is so much harder to completely change the layout of your city or change a massive part of the city once you've already built all this stuff and once you start zoning. So thinking about how big some of these houses are going to be and where they're going to sit and how they're going to grow and change over time is definitely something that's challenging to this because, usually you can just sort of chip away at things at over a long period of time and you can sort of see how things are taking shape. Whereas this way, we are just diving right in, and that's a little bit daunting and a bit scary when you're planning out these roads because you don't really know how the city is going to look in a couple of episodes' time. It could be, some of these roads could be in terrible locations. But I guess the real fun thing about this is thinking about the city in terms of an onion. At least that's how I'm thinking about it. Sort of like you've got this center that's super dense and these roads that are not really leaving a huge amount of space in between the houses or the buildings. And then as you get a little bit further out, things start to have a little bit of extra room, the suburbs change and the streets change, and you're starting to think about the amount of space that all these places are going to have in between. And then thinking about the farms that are going to sit around the outskirts or even the Everglades that's going to form this outer edge of the city. So I'm really thinking about that as we are working through these roads and making some of the changes. So basically, don't get too used to the things we are doing early on in Sunset City because we're going to be making a fair amount of changes. The roads where they are going, that's probably going to stay the same, but a lot of the other aspects that we are going to be building could definitely be changing as we progress. Soak up the colourful roads, they are not going to stay. We are going to upgrade these roads back to a very depressing grey. The asphalt will return. And man, I tell you what, the city is looking much larger than I ever expected. Even though I did plan the map and I did build all these roads, it's always hard to know how big things are going to get until you start planning things out with these roads and seeing how big interchanges are and main roads are and the size of vehicles far out. And it's only going to double in size because if you think about it, all this area is going to be zoned up. I plan to spread the city all into these parts. And then even around the interchange, we're going to have some residential, all into this area planned. This is where I planned to build some sort of secondary city. And then all over here, this is Sunset City Beach, and this whole bay area will also be zoned up. So we are looking at a pretty big place. But for now, we are just going to focus on this area, which is still fairly large. So there's probably a couple of areas that you're questioning, something like this, and there's a couple of weird intersections going on. Well, the reason why I've got that is because I want to show a bit of the destructive nature of these highways and also these main roads that have been widened over time and the traffic. You can see where we have the main road sitting. So this is where I anticipate there being the most amount of traffic. Hopefully that's the case. Otherwise we'll have to do some upgrading as we build the city. But of course, heading towards our port and our harbour, we're going to see a lot of traffic. So these roads are much larger. These are almost like a highway. Well, they are technically a highway, but we'll probably zone on them as well. And you can see where they have just totally butchered intersections. So now we just have a bunch of nodes heading in that direction as if there was some sort of intersection. And this is built afterwards. And the same with the highway. You can see where we have destructed roads. You can see a road that still snakes its way underneath it, but I'll probably turn that into something a lot smaller. maybe even like an avenue or something. Not an avenue, an alley. And it's the same for the rail line. These is going to be some very interesting looking dead ends that I plan to put like bits of trash, and we'll have some fences and some, people walking across it. So we'll probably have some pedestrian paths going across for people to access. So, some real interesting parts of the city that you can see where the city has grown over time and developed. And of course we did it all at the same time, but I think it's looking pretty interesting. And there's a couple of spots on the road that I would like to work on pretty quickly. In fact, this spot down here, I think the downtown is going to happen maybe in the next couple of episodes. And we're going to have to figure out what this is going to look like, because at the moment, I really do hate it. It's way too wide. It's just ugly, but I would like it to reflect something more of an avenue. Getting a couple of things like that in this area, I think will work really nicely. And say goodbye to the colorful city and our money, because we are about to see all that disappear. And not an exaggeration either, the money absolutely disappears. Not just with the roads that I'm upgrading, but as we press play and see the simulation run, we pay a lot of money on the roads that we have built. And a fun fact, I had recorded a live play at the end of this episode where I tried to do a bit of zoning and let the simulation run for a bit, but absolutely failed every single time. So next episode, you're gonna have a big episode where we are going to be building and zoning a big chunk of the city. And I haven't recorded it yet. It's gonna be a real wait and see how that works, because at the moment, things aren't looking good. We need to make some money. We need to be able to make the city function, and I want to see a lot of the city developed. But that's it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. It is very much appreciated, and thank you so much for all the love and support for the new series. I'm loving this, and I'm glad you guys are too. Big shout outs to the people over on Patreon making videos like this possible. Luke Whiffen, Zach Thibault, Michael Ferry, Eleanor Lempel, Timothy Haytayan, Tajorvans, Irfan Apterictics, Spencer Hitchings, Matthew Harrison, Eckhart's Ladder, Ricardo Scaparo, and Alex Calvert. Thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.